So Hot Docs, for those of you who don't know, we are North America's largest documentary festival, market, and conference. We're the second biggest in the world. Coming up is our 25th edition. We're very excited. 11 days, 200 films, 17 screens. Big festival. We're hosting over 1,000 delegates and thousands of viewers. We also, of course, own the Hot Docs Ted Rogers Cinema now for our year-round programming. We have about 30 year-round staff, about 20 part-time staff at the cinema, and over 100 short-term contract staff we have for the festival. And as Felicia mentioned earlier, we have over 800 volunteers. Like I said, theater operations is a big chunk of our volunteers, but we also use them for marketing, helping with the industry conference activities, guest services, helping out in the volunteer office, as I'm sure a lot of you have done, special events, all that kind of stuff. So we started out as event, obviously, with the festival, but now we're also sort of year-round. So we do have a bit of both sides of things. Just to get a sense of the room, how many people are like managing volunteers for an event, like a weekend or a 2-week kind of event? And then everybody else is it year-round volunteers that you program? Okay, so there's obviously differences between the two, and we'll try to touch on both of those areas. I'm going to pass it over to Felicia. She's going to talk a bit about the resources. We're very excited as Hot Docs to kind of share our wealth of knowledge and our experience.
We are. Next slide, please. Thanks. So Alex Jarowski, who was in the position before me, she's currently on mat leave. I'm covering for her. Alex, her mandate for the volunteer department was to really build a support network for everybody. And what she did was she created a whole bunch of resources. So if you see here at this website will also be shared with you. It'll give you a lot of information about how you can manage your own volunteer department. We also have a handy guidebook, which I can pass around as well. This will also be online. But the whole thing is that here today, we are here to support each other and just spread ideas and maybe commiserate. We all have an understanding that our jobs take a lot of effort, and we take in a lot of other people's energy as we're dealing with a lot of humans. So it's very important that we do support each other. So take a look at this website later on, and I will share everything with all of you. So over to Steph. Talk more.
There we are. Can I get a sense from the room how many people already know about Working Culture? Just raise your hand if you know about us. Yeah? Can I venture a guess as to how you know about us? Is it the job board? Yeah, it is. We do have one of the most popular job boards for people who are either seeking seeking jobs in the arts or looking for talent. But we also do a lot more. So we are a nonprofit art service organization, and our mission is to support the people in the arts through career development and business skills training. We had our start actually around HR and more so human resource and policy type of development for the arts sector, because as a predominantly small and micro-sized organization base, often those kind of skills are lacking, or there's the absence of departments to support those kind of activities. So we try to help fill in those blanks and help individuals who are working in the arts really thrive and sort of find their place and find the skill sets that they need in order to move forward throughout their career. And in terms of how this partnership came to be with Hot Docs, the volunteer resources that Hot Docs developed came out of a similar funding stream that we received to develop our Inclusion in the Creative Workplace program. Alfie, if you may. Right here. So we were tasked with developing a suite of resources that would help small to medium-sized arts organizations start reflecting on where they see success in terms of diversity and inclusion in their workplace, and where there might be gaps, and how they can start going about addressing those gaps. And so a large part of what the workplace in the arts looks like is generally populated by volunteers. So it was a really natural alignment for us to work with Hot Docs to look at the strategies that they're putting forward in regards to volunteer management, and how diversity and inclusion can start being folded into those strategies. strategies. So in terms of the time that we have today, I'm going to be introducing you to some general concepts around diversity and inclusion in the workplace. For some of you, this information you may already know. For some of you, it may be fairly new. I just want to acknowledge that we're all at different levels in terms of our own personal knowledge in terms of diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And even within our organizations, there could be different levels. So what I'm hoping is that you'll take away some nuggets that you can bring back to your colleagues, or that it may reinforce things that you're doing well already so that you can build on them. And much like Hot Docs, all of our resources for inclusion in the creative workplace are available online. So we have a series of e-learning modules that help walk you through the development of an action plan. So in thinking about what you're doing with volunteer management, you might have an idea around how to diversify your programs and might not know where to start. We have an e-learning module that walks you through developing an action plan to even just think about who you might talk to next. About bringing that plan to fruition. We also have a series of downloadable templates through an HR toolkit that are pretty much ready to adapt and free to use, and a series of videos from people in the sector talking about some of the successful programs around diversity and inclusion that they've done that you can reflect on and potentially emulate in your own programs. Best of all of these resources are free. So I'll turn things back over to Felicia to get to start thinking about the volunteer management strategies.
So the agenda for today pretty much goes through the whole process from beginning to end of volunteer management. We'll talk about the planning and preparation involved. We'll talk about diversity inclusion basics with Stephanie again. Then we'll go into recruitment, how to find the volunteers you need, getting them orientated and trained so they're ready for your festival and signed up, feedback and evaluation, how to find out from them what's working, what's not working, and keeping track of your best volunteers. Retention rewards, how to keep the best people coming back, and accessibility. We'll wrap it up with that. So starting with planning preparation.
Yeah. The life cycle. So today's lecture is designed based on the volunteer life cycle. So that was created by Helen Bustles and Deborah Forbes, who noticed that volunteers did have their own pattern of deciding when to become a volunteer. So they will determine if they want to volunteer, they will decide to volunteer, they will actually take the steps to volunteering, and then they will decide whether they want to commit to volunteering. So when we take that model, the life cycle is very important to us because then we can start planning and go through each series of these steps. So we're going to start with planning and preparation. So Ron and I will be going through this and giving some real life examples of what we go through while we're planning our festival. Right now, I'm sure everybody here has planned an event. It's just really good to go through the steps of each process, and we'll start there. So for us right now, we are creating our critical path. If you can turn to the next slide, that's awesome. On your handout, you would be able to see how we have created our own critical path. For us, we do, as Ron said, we have year-round volunteers. And with these year-round volunteers, we do have our critical path that goes throughout the year. But for our festival runs from April 26th to May 6th. So we do have a critical path that lasts about 5 months, around 5 months, yeah. So we'll start in January and go from there. The general basis for a good critical path for a 5-month cycle is if you are trying to attract a few hundred volunteers. And if you have a 3-month critical path, then you are looking at a few and up to 100 volunteers. So I'll get Ron to go over what we do with our critical path.
We keep our critical path on an Excel spreadsheet. It's always being updated in terms of times each year. It's a great history of what's worked, what didn't work. It's very important to use it to figure out the timing and who's doing what, as Felicia said. Does anybody else have who has a critical path for their organization? I'm sure like Luminato must be important to, as a first year, you probably rely on it heavily to see what the timing of everything is. Is it an Excel spreadsheet or what do you?
It is Excel, so it's been highly adapted from last year.
Yeah, the nice thing with Excel is when you change the dates, you can resort it to put things in order. Does anybody use anything more advanced than Excel? Just curiosity, no? Okay. So part of with the critical path, in addition to that, we also hold weekly team check-ins to see where we're at in terms of the tasks. Then we hold bi-weekly meetings with our supervisor, the department head, so we can escalate issues if there's things that we need to manage that aren't being blocked by some other department. We need to get things through. It's a chance to go through what the priorities are, what's ahead, looking ahead, making sure we have the resources ready in time. We're fortunate at Hot Docs to be a big organization. We've got a fairly good team, which is great because we have a real sort of diverse team as well. I've been doing this for a number of years, so I kind of bring the institutional knowledge into it. But we have new staff with Taylor and Felicia, and Aiden Crook is also on the team. They're bringing in some good fresh perspectives, looking at things with new eyes, but also experience in areas that maybe we don't have: tech, more database experience, social medias, just bringing in fresh new ideas to the organization. And of course, as we figure things out, we revise the critical path for next year. So it's always good to have notes to change it up for the following year.
Thanks, Ron. Does anybody know what the biggest challenge is when creating a critical path? Anybody have an idea? For us, it's definitely staying on track. Time can get away from all of us. One day we were like, oh, going home at 5 o'clock, it's great, fantastic. And then now that we're closer to festival, it's like 12-hour days and you don't know where the time has gone. So having those meetings it's definitely valuable for all of us just to stay on track. Generally, I am around to whip people into shape pretty much and be like, we got to stay on track, as well as all of the other bosses. So it's very key to have somebody that is checking it on a daily basis or checking it on a weekly or bi-weekly basis.
I think it's the other challenge for me anyway is taking the time to work on the critical path, making those notes, keeping it up to date, not kind of getting caught up in the whole I want to do it rather than track what I'm doing. So it is very important. I'm sure like those of you taking over a program, if it doesn't have a good critical path, if it wasn't kept up to date, it's a real pain. So it's just taking those few minutes a day just to make sure that it's up to date and ready for next year.
Thanks, Ron. The other thing about creating a good critical path is that you want to assess your resources and needs. So when you're assessing those needs, for us, we have to understand what each department needs in terms of volunteer resources. So with that, we will give them both ask them to give a job description, and we give them a request form. That is also on your handout. Those are very handy in terms of getting people organized, and for us for our department who has to promote and recruit volunteers, it's very important that we have that knowledge on hand in terms of how many volunteers, what their skills are, and what time of day that we need them. Again, lucky for us, we have good interdepartmental communication, so we're able to have at our staff meetings, we can remind people to let us know when they need the request forms. People email us when they request volunteers. And then, of course, our other part of our job is to just remind people that we need them as well. So a lot of time management goes into this, and relationship management goes into this. All right, so Ron, you want to go over how we work out our monthly requests?
Sure. So The year-round need for volunteers is, our main need is ushers at the cinema. So like we do with the volunteer request form, it's all about the right information so that everybody has everything they need to proceed. So obviously, we do it monthly, on a monthly basis, but obviously our needs for ushers at the cinema is entirely based on the programming. So once the programming is locked, then I use a spreadsheet which has like the start time of shifts, the end time of shifts, number of volunteers that are needed, if there's any special tasks because of the nature of the event, if there's a different supervisor that would normally be involved for the volunteers to report to, and also sometimes incentives. Sometimes we need to, you know, for instance, we usually, for us, the ushers, their benefit is to watch the event as the part of the shift. They help set up and get the crowd in, they watch the event, they help clean up at the end. But sometimes, if it's a free screening, for instance, then we need to sort of plan in advance that, you know, that's not much of a reward to see the free screening, so we have to throw in incentives for that. So it's all those little information bits that we need well in advance. I pass all that information to Alex, or in this now to Felicia. She posts it onto the portal. We get all the volunteers signed up. So when they sign up, they know exactly what they're getting themselves into because we collected all the information we needed to do the staff requests.
Sorry, Russ, from here.
Yep.
Can you give an example of some of these incentives? Are they monetary, not monetary?
Oh, yeah, we're going to talk about benefits later, but for us, it's like I think with most event kind of based volunteering, it's access to the events themselves, usually outside the shifts. We actually, and we explain this to our volunteers all the time because it can be confusing. During the festival, the volunteers working in the theaters do not watch the films on shift because there's all kinds of tasks going on, different lineups, multiple screens at a single venue. But we give them vouchers to go see films after their shift. So we always talk about, you know, don't sign up. If you see a movie, if there's a movie playing you want to see, don't sign up for that shift. Take the day off, watch them, you know, work the day before, get a voucher, and then watch the film. But during the year-round at the cinema, we actually do it the same way a lot of the smaller live theaters do it, which is, like I said, they get the crowd in, watch the event, and then clean up at the end. So the incentive is the actual screening. So we have to coordinate it so that we can make sure they see the whole event, but that's the incentive there. But like I said, if it's a free event, then we'll throw in vouchers to see something else some other time. So that's vouchers, screening vouchers is our main currency for volunteering, which is really handy for us.
It is a good point to consider what the benefits are at this point, because when you are designing your critical path, you do want to think about how long it's going to take to develop those benefits. You might have to form partnerships with people, which also will take a little bit of time. You also want to take into consideration how much of a time commitment. I would talk to Ron about whether the shift is actually long enough for our volunteers or for any department. If they're coming in for 2 hours, we suggest that they come in that they request a volunteer for 3 hours. So we want to consider all of that. When you're building your critical path, you want to think about when your orientation and training is, the application process, because that could take a while in terms of designing. Some people like longer information, some people like shorter information on their application form, and you want to make sure that that application form connects with your actual database. So everything to consider there could take a long amount of time, but hopefully you have somebody that has already built that, and the time will be shorter. You also want to consider if volunteers need police check. So for us, if the festival is coming up in April, we have to get all of those things factored in well before April so that we can onboard our volunteers and get them ready for festival as fast as possible. So once we have all of that information in, we do offer training to our staff. What that training consists of is we will teach our staff about conflict management, how to give out the rewards at the end of the day for our volunteers, and really to rethink the skill level of each volunteer. So if they are at a venue working on a specific event and our staff member is managing them, we ask them to, if the volunteer is not doing something correctly, we ask them to talk to them on the spot or redirect them to another job. We also ask our staff for feedback right away, so the night after, we'll ask them whether the volunteer has done a good job. All right, next slide. So once we have all of this information from our staff side, we also want to think about our volunteers. We definitely have to think about their schedule. People obviously work, so there are different ranges of ages that we have from 19 up until seniors. So we really have to think about when they can come in and offer up their time for us. So for the festival, we have multiple times to volunteer. There are daytime hours, there are evening hours, so everybody can lend their skills at some point. We also have to think about the socioeconomic factors that affect our volunteers, and Stephanie will go over that later on. When you are looking for a good volunteer, you would want to have a really great application form. As I said, some people like to have it shorter, some people like to have it longer, but you essentially need the important information, which is name, first name, last name, email. What we did this year is we asked our volunteers to confirm their email, because a lot of emails get lost in the mix. So that was one handy thing. We have to let them know what we want to know what their time commitment is and why they want to volunteer. Go ahead, Cecilia.
Do you mind sharing? I see that the application form is here, which
Yeah.
is fairly simple.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind sharing like what steps? So a volunteer fills out an application form, and then how do you ask for more information after that?
Yeah, so good question. Yeah, so they fill out the way that it works is we recruit, they fill out the application form, it's on the website. We'll go over having a proper website and finding that information. They get the form, they fill out the form, and then they get an automatic response email. That is very important so that they know orientation times, they know how to connect with us. They also have our phone number, so if they have any additional questions, they can call us.
Yeah, we're fortunate to have a very self-managed database system for the volunteers. They go in and put their information in. Our experience has been that by keeping a very simple application form, they don't kind of build expectations before they've learned what we're all about. If you do have a very complex application form and you're asking them about their education and their experience and their skills and all that, you might possibly build up expectations that they're going to be able to use all these skills in the roles. Then they come to your orientation, they find out that all you really need is people to rip tickets. So we have it set up so that it's a very simple application, then they come to orientation, that's when they learn about, we'll talk about it in details obviously, that's when they learn about the different roles, the different things, and then when they get access to the system, they build their own profile. So they gear it.
They give you more information.
Exactly. So we have it set up, like for instance, we have some events involving students, working with students. So as we explain the orientation that, we have this job opportunity to volunteer with the student screenings, there we'll look for people with backgrounds with students or retired teachers, that kind of thing. So they can actually at the orientation find out, oh yeah, that's the job I want to do. Now I'm going to go into the system and I'm going to say I have this background so that we can then look and go, oh, this person does. So we sort of, it's a way of managing expectations. But again, we're fortunate to have that system where they can access their own profile and fill out information that way. And we'll talk a bit more about databases in a second.
The other thing, thanks, Ron. The other thing that we do for leadership positions, we actually get people to email us their resume and cover letter, and then we follow up with an interview. Ron's going to talk a little bit more about software management, which is also very important to what we do, especially having the application form linked to a specific database.
So there's lots of options out there for databases. These are some of the good ones you can look up online. The very basics, obviously, is you want a system for scheduling the volunteers. They need to know exactly, you need accurate information about, for the volunteers, of when their shift is, where they need to go, and all that information, in a way to, take that from the database and communicate it to them. And then vice versa as well, you want to be able to export the information so that the supervisors know exactly who's coming, what time they're coming, and that sort of information. So the accuracy, of course, very important. But it's good, too, to have the history. Obviously, particularly with event management, you're going from year to year. Sometimes it's brand new people. You don't know all the volunteers. So you want a system that will allow you to keep track of history of the volunteers, what they've done before, some feedback, comments, that kind of stuff, performance notes. So costs and functionality, obviously a big factor. Not everybody has the budgets to use the bigger ones. Some of them can be cheaper, some, functionality, you take what you can get. But obviously you want something that's usable from the beginning to the end. Ideally something that your application form goes straight into, your feedback after the festival, after the event, how they did, or year round, how they're doing. That information is with it. You might have to check with if you're looking for a new system, obviously, check your company, the organization, to see what customer relation management systems they're using already. In our case, we use Salesforce for our database. We've adapted it as best we can to our needs. It's a fairly big, diverse database. We do the film programming for the festival in it. We keep track of virtually everyone that's ever emailed or filled out a form to contact Hot Docs, so we can send out mass emails to all kinds of parties. We use it for fundraising, keeping track of donors, that kind of stuff. So we've adapted the Salesforce system to manage the volunteers as well, because in a way the volunteers are part of the whole big family of patrons of the festival. Ideally, if you can get, the more the system is self-managed, obviously the better, by the volunteers themselves. They can log in and do the stuff themselves. When I first started, we were doing Excel and spreadsheets and Access database, and it was a lot of data inputting because the volunteers were obviously not typing their own schedules into the system. But the more you can present it to them, get them signed up. We also found it saves a lot of time to have a system that the volunteers can drop the shifts. We want them to plan their schedules in advance, but obviously, especially for event work, you want to give them flexibility to choose a shift now, but maybe a week from now, it's still 2 weeks before the event even starts, they've suddenly got an exam they have to study for, so they can drop the shift, and then it automatically becomes available for someone else to sign up. So we do encourage our volunteers to log in often, particularly at the meetings when we do orientation sessions for the festival. We stress that you might go in one day and not find the shift you want, but the next day somebody dropped it, and there it is. So just throwing it back to the room, what kind of systems does everybody use? Luminato is it Falgistics there? Sorry? And how's that working or what's your experience with it so far?
It's good. I've used Falgistics before. I do like Better Intent in terms of you can sort people by any qualifiers, so you can really specify and dig down into what people have done previously and retain that information and search through using those different qualifications.
Yeah, it's good to have that sorting capacity, especially for communications, when you want to sort of, you don't want to send everybody the same emails all the time. They get sort of overdone and they start, fading out. But if you can really target it, like we, for instance, as part of their profile, we ask them to indicate if they're interested in pre-festival shifts, if they're available for 9 to 5 office jobs, so that if we do suddenly have a request to get a volunteer to come in and stuff some envelopes on a Tuesday afternoon, rather than hitting all 800 volunteers, we just hit the people that have said, yes, I can do weekday stuff. And as well, we do things like leadership roles. Another example where captains, we designate them as captains, and then the system controls whether or not they can sign up for the leadership roles because they've been pre-vetted. We know they're part of the team. We don't need to write the schedule for them, but it does allow us to control who can sign up for those shifts. Anybody else want to talk about their systems they're using?
We have Salesforce, but
Ah.
not, I know that Hot Dogs had someone like program your volunteer like management system.
Right.
We're just using their volunteers for Salesforce.
Oh, okay. Is that working pretty good?
It's working. I wish it did some other stuff.
I'm curious.
We're looking into having like maybe at some point have a Salesforce representative to help us how to better use it.
Does the event programming happen inside Salesforce for you? Like the shows and all that, is that put into the system?
Yeah.
And then does the volunteer program, because I know when we started using Salesforce, the one option was to put the events in and then with the events build the volunteer shifts. It didn't quite pan out for us.
Yeah, that's how we had to do it, and it's a little bit more work than
Yeah. It's kind of tricky because databases never replace the human knowledge, and it doesn't look at things like that's a really bad time to have the volunteers start and the other ones to leave, and so you have to kind of still manually.
And then they can sign up on their end for shifts, but there's not really an option for them to input. They can sign up for the application form, but it doesn't really create a profile for them so that they can access it and give us more information. I kind of have to follow up with them
Right.
and ask for stuff.
Okay. Yeah, we're doing a lot of Excel. We're lucky, of course, to have a big team at Hot Docs with this managing the Salesforce because it's used for so many items. But we're doing a lot of uploading Excel spreadsheets into the system. So, like for instance, like I was saying earlier with the volunteer shifts at the cinema, I use an Excel spreadsheet of where we track the events. And then adopt it to calculate volunteer shifts, and then we take that spreadsheet and upload it directly into the database. And for the first time, we're going to experiment at our new volunteer orientations. Kind of interesting. We used to just print out a sheet of who's expected, and we'd check them off. I'm sure everybody's done that. Have a meeting, check people off as they come in. And we're going to do it with a laptop on a spreadsheet, so that the Salesforce, so their RSVP for the orientation session, it goes directly connects to their application in Salesforce, and then we'll print out a spreadsheet or export a spreadsheet of who's coming to the orientation directly based on their names in the Salesforce that they've applied with. And then at the meeting, we'll just use check off a column in the spreadsheet, and then our IT person is going to just take that spreadsheet and automatically update everybody's profiles to give them access to the portal. So rather than individually going through 100 and 200 profiles and clicking a box, we can do it with an upload with a spreadsheet. So that's a good example too, because I know obviously budgets can be tight, but I think if you're presenting your case for a database, things like that where you can sort of show that rather than spending this many man hours or person hours, to do a task, it can be done instantly by uploading a spreadsheet. Any questions about databases or any more feedback, comments on that stuff? Cool. And now we go to
So one
next
other
slide.
thing on the technology side is to have a good website. So it's very key to have a website where the volunteer can easily find information about your volunteer department. So that could be about benefits, how to contact us, how to fill out an application. Ours is intentionally designed so that people can not just automatically click, I want to become a volunteer. They have to go through a series of steps and FAQs, and even when they email us, we do direct them to the website so that they can read more of the information, just so that they can be more active in the application process. So again, to have it very simple, if you can get it on one of your first tabs on your organization's website, just so that it's very easy for people to find. I know nowadays if I'm scrolling and have to figure something out, I would just be like, forget it. So to make it as easy as possible for people to volunteer, but also to make them active in the application process. One other thing for a good website is to have happy and diverse people on those websites. It's another way of getting people engaged and knowing that they can be part of the organization. Again, when you're developing this, it could take some time. We do have, as Ron said, a bigger team, so we have our IT and our communications division that can help us out with redesigning the website. So I will send that person an email and say we need this updated, and it'll be updated by the end of the day. So that's very lucky for us. But again, to have a nice, beautiful website for people to find and happy, smiling faces. To talk more about why diversity and inclusion is important, I'll hand it over to Steph.
So I'll preface by saying that diversity and inclusion is a very important consideration and element to be thinking about at any stage of the volunteer life management cycle, but often it is something that we really discuss the imperative behind during the planning stage. Sometimes it does make it a little bit more easier and effective to roll out and test and measure whether those activities are impactful during a run, and when you're coming back to sort of the end period, looking at feedback and evaluation, it gives us a sense to figure out, what we might work on for the next session. And that's really how we base the creation of the resources that we have around. So we recognize that the cultural sector has a wealth of different voices and a tradition of presenting different perspectives. However, sometimes the workforce or the volunteer base of this sector doesn't necessarily reflect the diversity of the community it's operating in. That's just a reality. Many of you may have already have this sort of in mind and may be thinking about how you might advance that within your volunteer management strategies. So this is the perfect time to really start thinking about that and even just test things out. Beyond that, because many of us work for small organizations, the reality is that when you do have an event happening or you are doing events throughout the year, it sometimes increases your staff size significantly, or your base significantly. So there are opportunities within that when you know that you are going to be having an influx of people. I think Felicia was mentioning and Ron were mentioning that the Hot Docs team grows by 800 over the course of volunteers over the course of the festival. So there's a lot of opportunities there to make sure that you're really connecting with the community, that you're reflecting them within also the organizational practices as a whole as well. Again, this may be information that is not new to some folks, but I thought we'd start at a very sort of high-level approach because we are going to be leaving you with resources that you can revisit later on and use to continue the conversation beyond our time together today. So I thought we'd start off with even just some basic definitions. And I'm going to throw out just the basic textbook definition for diversity, and that is, it is a range of different things. That in itself is not very compelling, right? But when we start thinking about all the different components and elements that could make up diversity, it really starts to contextualize it for ourselves, especially when we're thinking about the workplace and our volunteer base. So I'm actually going to throw it out to you folks just to get a sense of where, what you might be thinking of within your organizations, and ask you, what do you see as some of the elements or components that make up diversity in your organization? Gender, yeah.
People from different ethnic backgrounds.
Certainly, yes, thank you.
Age.
Absolutely, yeah, age. Religion, yeah, faith, absolutely.
Ethnic orientation.
Pardon me?
Sexual orientation.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Anybody, socioeconomic factors?
Certainly, yeah. Absolutely. Anybody else? One more maybe? Yeah, it could be region as well. I'll pop up the fish. So we've identified quite a few of the components, and when we kind of contextualize it like that, it does make a big difference, right? We're not just thinking about different things, we're thinking about all these different components that could help us leverage our community more effectively. and even the elements that we have here are not, are somewhat limited. The components that help us define diversity are always changing. And so some of the things that we shouted out, I mean, they're not even listed here, like the socioeconomic background isn't there. So these are just sort of a reference point to think of when you are thinking about diversity. If you do have a very particular experience with one section or a certain range of diversity elements, there are many more that you're able to explore. So then how about inclusion? I mean, that's kind of easy. If we're thinking about the textbook definition of inclusion, it's right there. It's really the act of being included. Again, not very compelling when you're just thinking about it as the basic definition. But when we think it in the concept of the workplace, and thank you, Elfie, you were right on. It's like you're reading my mind. It's perfect. When we're thinking about inclusion in the context of our workplace or our volunteer base, inclusion helps us put the concepts and the practices of diversity into action. So it helps us create an environment of involvement where ideas and different backgrounds and different perspectives can really be harnessed in a way that benefits everyone, not just the people who are involved in supporting your organization, but the organization as well as a whole. Part of the problem that I've seen personally when talking about diversity and inclusion in the arts sector is that sometimes diversity and inclusion get lumped in together and are assumed to be the same thing, but that's really not the case. In the context of the workplace or volunteer force, diversity really just means representation. That's it. Without inclusion, the crucial connections that you make between the people who make up your base and the benefits that you can leverage from diversity won't happen. So we really need both diversity and inclusion to be successful within our organizations, within our volunteer management practices, and really in just terms of our day-to-day interactions with people in our community. So to summarize, really, diversity is the reality. Our country, our province, and our city is diverse. Inclusion is what we do with that reality. So creating environments and systems that work for everyone is really what inclusion is about. And I mean, that is kind of a bit of a dry approach. So seeing as we are very creative folks, I like to, I have my own kind of example that really helped me visualize how diversity and inclusion could work well together. And I based it around a topic that I don't actually have a lot of knowledge around, because sometimes diversity and inclusion can be challenging, or the concepts can be kind of challenging for some folks. So for me, I use a baking example. I'm not very good at baking. I find it a little bit challenging. But when I look at an ingredient list and acknowledge that there are certain ingredients and you need certain elements to make a cake, inclusion is making all those ingredients work well together. You wouldn't necessarily just throw all the ingredients into a bowl and hope for the best. There are definite steps that you have to follow to make sure that you're leveraging your flour and your eggs and your sugar and putting things in the right time and supporting the bowl when you're mixing and all of that to make sure that what you end up with is a cake and not something else. Defining diversity and inclusion is simple enough in a general sense, and we see examples of it working particularly well or not so well in our day-to-day lives. So I thought maybe I'd also turn it back to you folks and just get a sense of if you are working on a diversity and inclusion initiative, where have you seen it working really well within your organization? Yes?
Hi. So we actually had a couple of deaf students in our program over the couple of years, and then one of the students was hired into our team. She's a graphic designer, and she was doing posters for us and stuff like that. And then we realized, why don't we do a workshop around ASL, American Sign Language, and actually teach our students to sign, because that's the way to communicate with other deaf students and with our now coworker.
Certainly.
So that workshop has been so popular. Half of our students can sign now. So half of them
That's great.
can American Sign Language. And then we went a little bit more ahead, and then we started doing videos, music videos, where we sign the lyrics. So and then we involve the whole George Brown community, and then we sign it and we share it with our partners and stuff like that. So
That's fantastic. I think awesome is this, right? Or
Clap.
oh, that's just clapping? Oh, well, clapping. That's great. Great. Awesome. That's great. That's a perfect example. So as a primer to the following slides when we start talking about the rest of the volunteer life cycle, its elements, I would encourage you to be thinking about what role diversity and inclusion could currently plays in the work that you do, and where you think it might make a difference at every stage that we're going to be talking about today. Think about why it might matter to your organization, either historically or at a current point in time, or in reaction to something that's happening externally within your community. Think about where you see it being done well, or making a difference in your organization or in your community, or even think about where else you're seeing it being done where you might want to emulate within your organization or your own practices. Thinking in this high-level way helps you start mapping out the work that might need to be done, or even helps you identify what you might already be doing well already, or maybe what needs to be revisited. And why does this matter? Alfie? An inclusive workplace, one where the full talents and abilities of everyone are given the opportunity to be used and developed, is going to create more diverse and inclusive outputs. Just like that example there. Putting our energies into creating staff or board or volunteers that are a true reflection of our community is obviously going to help us better connect with our community. So really, if I, as a potential volunteer, can see that my community or my experience is reflected in your organization, I'm going to feel that I belong, and I'm going to feel that my experience is supported in the work that you do, and that generally makes things like recruitment and onboarding and retention a lot easier for you. So where do we start? There we go. Thank you. For many of us, especially for small organizations, addressing diversity and inclusion within an organization, it's hard. We're small teams. We have limited resources, especially if folks are nonprofits. We're also competing with grants, so there is inconsistent funding. So it's not always easy. So the first thing I like to say is, we should acknowledge that there is a lot of work that needs to be done, but it's not going to happen overnight. And that's okay. So in a sense, we can take a little bit of pressure off of ourselves. We're not going to be solving every issue, or even if you have questions today, I might not have answers, or my colleagues might not have answers right now. But one of the benefits of coming together like this is that where there are gaps, we know that people are working on activities themselves, and there's an opportunity to share and help leverage the strengths that other organizations are exhibiting, and try to emulate it where we might have gaps. And one of the ways that we can start doing this is shifting away from a laundry list kind of approach, which I find tends to be kind of the way that people start to think when they think about diversity and inclusion. So they think, we have to do this, 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 or we're not reaching this community, so we have to, do all of these tasks. And it can seem really overwhelming when you're looking at it like a list. The reality is that diversity and inclusion isn't a checklist. And I really want to encourage you to be thinking of as something that needs to be considered at all times. There is no magic checklist that denotes when you've reached peak diversity or whether you've achieved optimal inclusion. And the reality is that the terms and the perspectives are going to be changing as well. So the best thing you can do is really start acknowledging what's working in your organization so that you can be more responsive to when things change. And so in thinking about starting your own diversity and inclusion activities, one of the things you're going to be likely to hear is, are you culturally competent? And that refers to the behaviors or practices, attitudes, and policies that enable us as individuals and as organizations to work well with diversity. And I know there's a lot of text here, and it might be a little bit hard to read, but don't worry, because as part of the resources that we're going to be sending out, we'll send out a PDF on this slide. So if you can't see right here, no worries, you'll have this information at your disposal afterwards. So what cultural competency really comprises of is 4 elements. There's awareness of one's own cultural worldview, attitudes towards cultural differences, so what you might know about other cultures, knowledge of different practices, cultural practices and worldviews, and the ability to then to connect cross-culturally with those different differences. And when I use the term culture or cultures, I'm referring to the broad term. So I mean the beliefs, customs, practices, experiences, histories, etc., of a particular group or community or place, not necessarily what I think some people think of automatically when they hear the word culture, and just ethnicity. So culture could be, looking at my own experience, I'm, a woman, a young woman, not as young as I used to be, and I have a certain set of experience given my upbringing, given my connection to the newcomer community. So I bring to the table a very particular set of worldviews and experiences and abilities that can help other people connect with those communities. So it's really thinking about diversity and inclusion less as that checklist kind of element, and more as a competency. So as a set of skills, knowledge, and attitudes to really help you understand how to holistically approach it in your organization and in your volunteer management practices. So becoming culturally competent starts with really the self, what you know about yourself, what you might know about others, and all of that helps you figure out what you also need to learn. And in that same vein, you can then apply the same reflection to your organization as a whole and start identifying where work may need to be done, and where you might start planning to address those gaps. So something to think about as we move through the volunteer life cycle and on to our next slides on recruitment. And before we do that, just because I know that we have a bit of time, I thought, does anybody have any questions before we move on?
I have a couple of points to make too. Just from our perspective, we started, we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but we have started to champion accessibility and diversity initiatives this year. And what that entails is that we had to have somebody champion it. So I believe as volunteer managers and people who, like our Crystal, who is our theaters manager for the festival, I believe that because we are working with so many different people, we are in a unique position to bring forth these initiatives to our organizations. But it does take a lot of effort and time and the willingness to do so, and the ability to speak up about issues that you might not want to speak about.
Certainly. Well, you nailed it. I mean, that's really what the whole cultural competency piece is about. It's and part of the way that it moves forward is through somebody who is a champion and who is willing to talk about it and willing to bring it up and approach it in a constructive way because of whatever reason they think might help benefit the organization. Excellent point.
We also, and again, to bring it to real life, we have a diverse team ourselves. So we have somebody that is non-gender binding. We have myself, I'm female, I'm Black, so I will always bring up some culturally relevant thing that I know about. I have parents that are very elderly, so I think about access to washrooms and stuff like that. Ron here, he has had many years on our team and has an understanding of the organization itself. I hope it's okay to speak for you, Ron. But everybody on our team has the different perspectives. We have also asked our volunteers to come on board and give their feedback as well. We'll talk more about getting feedback from others later, but it is important for diversity and initiative and inclusivity.
Absolutely,
initiatives.
yeah. And to your point that, I mean, it is a lot of work and it doesn't necessarily happen overnight, but even small steps like that, like acknowledging, what an organization might have to offer in terms of the staff, experiences, and connections, has a huge impact over time. And it kind of ends up creating a bit of a snowball effect once you do get going.
Yeah,
Yeah,
awesome.
great.
So we'll continue on with that discussion as we go through. Thanks, Steph. All right, on to recruitment. So now that we know who we want, when we want them, and we're thinking about how diverse our team is, it's now time to actually plan for the event. So the first step is to have good materials. For us, if you next slide, Alfie, thanks. For us, we have created a small bookmark. I can show you during the break, but it essentially has the information that we need to move forward. Would definitely need to have all of the information, including our sponsors, our website, when our festival dates are, and that this is a volunteer recruitment flyer. So volunteers has to be central to the recruitment material. One other thing, so this year we have also redesigned our emails so that it's visually pleasing. Again, the whole thing is about catching people's eye and making sure that they're not working too much. Now the hard thing for us is that we have to put a lot of information into the emails. So we'll have call outs from different organizations, as well as highlighting different things that are going on in the cinema and giving people all the information that they need to make sure that they volunteer successfully. So we have Aiden, who is the co-lead with me, the co-coordinator, and they have a design background. So Aiden has done a lot of redesigning our emails, our social media, and we also have a good connection with our communications team. So I will meet with them at least once a week to make sure that Twitter blasts are going, any social media blasts are going. So on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. For us, we have about 2 posts per week, and if anything comes up, then we will blast out to our volunteers. At all of our orientation sessions, we ask our volunteers to follow us on Instagram, anywhere on social media, so that we can give them the information if they're not getting it through email. So very important. Steph is going to go over some
Just an example.
not so fun recruitment flyers with you.
Just because we're moving on to recruitment, and we don't want to, even though I was here just a minute ago, we don't want to forget that there are certain diversity and inclusion elements that we might include in our thinking about recruitment. And we have a little example that I wanted to work folks through. So a little bit more about me. At one point, I did go to school for visual arts. And I don't get to use them as much as I used to, and that's probably for the best. So I put together this little poster here, just as an example of what you might see out in your communities, or what you might be, just thinking in terms of how you might bring people into your space. So for those of you folks who can't see, up at the top we have a little line that says calling for volunteers. We've got some shoes to fill. ABC organization needs volunteers for our upcoming community performance on June 1st, 2018 at 6 p.m. In the ABC organization community room at 123 Fake Street on the 3rd floor in Toronto. And in the description it says, are you a jack of all trades? Do you like to wear many hats? This may be the opportunity for you. Volunteers must apply by submitting an online application. There's a link there. Volunteers must be able to speak English fluently. Volunteers must be in good health. And we are looking for volunteers to fill the roles of seamstresses, greeters, setup crew, and skilled tradesmen. So I'll throw this out to the group. And I must say, it did pain me to put this together when I was putting it together. But can we, as a group, maybe identify some potential issues with the following recruitment poster? aside from maybe my poor graphic design skills?
Good health, I think that it's very vague.
It's very vague.
Women are-
Yes, and for some people who may not know, asking about health status is one of the protected grounds under the Ontario Human Rights Commission. So also something you actually can't ask. It's a very good one, thank you. Anyone else? Yes? Absolutely, that is not very inclusive at all. Yep. Sorry, Cecilia, you had your hand up? Same one?
To that,
Okay, good.
I could speak something else.
Yeah.
Are you a jack of all trades?
It's vague, right? Yeah, I mean, it's assuming that maybe somebody has experience with that kind of common phrase. You know, I mean, it brings up exactly, and language is a huge thing, right? I mean, you know, I think because a lot of the times, especially in the arts, I know that I talk in acronyms all the time because I work with a lot of organizations. So I'm always talking about, you know, NYA, HD, you know, WIC, and you know, to me, that makes sense, and with a lot of the folks I'm working with, it makes sense to them. But thinking in terms of the experience of somebody else, it's not very clear. So yes, absolutely, language plays a big role in that. Yep. Exactly.
The
Yeah.
many hats comment.
Sorry?
The many hats comment.
Many hats comment,
all
yeah.
three are very.
Yeah, so I mean, and continuing on the idea of it being vague, if we're thinking about putting together a job description, this doesn't actually give us much to go on either, right? So in terms of, Ron and Felicia were talking about, you know, meeting expectations when people apply to a program, we're not really seeing that here.
It doesn't tell you if it's an accessible space and it's on the third floor.
Yes.
Also, those are not really volunteer positions, so they're sort of hiring for things that you should not be volunteering for.
Yes, and I mean, that is an issue that we do see permeate through the art and culture sector, maybe for another conversation another time. But certainly in terms of the roles that are being advertised, I mean, that maybe might contribute more to thinking about planning and maybe recruitment and retention. Are we hiring volunteers for the right roles and that type of thing? Absolutely. So we've talked a little bit more about what might make things more inclusive in terms of language and noting whether or not there's accessible space. Anything else that might make this a little bit more inclusive?
For me, the design element. So there's a lot. I know. There's a lot of information.
Yes.
On one sheet. Try to put it in different spaces, and have a visual. But there's a lot of information packed in.
Certainly.
The application line is also very demanding. Volunteers must apply by submitting, as opposed to more friendly language.
Or friendly language, or even thinking about what other options might be available. I mean, for some folks, especially if you're working with a big team, online might be one of the only ways you can go, but do you have the option to do in-person volunteers? Can you take things over the phone? What options do you have? One other thing that I'll point out here, again, bridging on kind of protected grounds here, but asking for people to fill the roles of things like seamstress or tradesman, gendering roles is not necessarily the most inclusive practice that you could bring to your planning. And in terms of thinking about, I mean, we've talked a bit about the volunteer recruitment strategy. You know, what other considerations around recruitment might come to mind? So maybe if we're thinking about, yes, sorry.
I think contextualizing your organization, because it seems like a call out for just people as opposed to people that would be invested in what you're doing.
That's it. So there's not a lot of consideration here about maybe who was involved in writing this post, how they might connect with other staff there. You know, there's a lot wanting. So I may need to go back and rethink it. Yeah. Great. Any other comments or tips that anybody would like to share? Yes?
Just a random thing, if you're doing anything online with pictures, I really encourage alt text.
There you go.
So the image doesn't display for people who have issues with vision. They might be having it read aloud to them instead of just being a blank thing that doesn't exist. It'll explain the image, so you would put like a group of like happy volunteers at the Hot Dog Cinema, like
Certainly. Yeah, so that people have a better sense of what to expect. And even, I mean, we talked a bit about posting it on the website. I mean, what if this was posted on a community board in a church? Or, you know, in the hot dogs venue? I mean, how would people interpret it there? So a lot of things that we need to be thinking about when we are thinking about recruitment. And I think that's a good time to then turn things back over to Felicia and Ron to continue talking about what kind of strategies we might bring to the forefront.
So taking from the book, the Essential Volunteer Management textbook, there's basically three types of recruitment that we've going to sort of look at. The first is called all hands on deck or warm body. This is basically when you need just a lot of people for a diversity of tasks and responsibilities, and it's really just quantity. So here, a lot of advertising, a lot of creating materials like we did the bookmark and getting them out as far and wide as possible just to attract the interest. Word of mouth is a great way, obviously, to expand your base by getting, you know, the people who've volunteered before to talk it up and promote your event. The website, getting people come through the website, holding recruitment events, and of course, social media is also a great way to get the word out. Secondly, there is targeted recruitment. This is more when you need very specific skill sets or different age groups, diversity. You want to get spread out beyond your normal circle, and you want to get more of a targeted recruitment going. So there's a lot more planning involved with this because you do need to sort of think about who you need and where you can find them. Obviously, educational institutions, school programs where they're concentrating and studying those skills. It's a good way to find volunteers, like-minded organizations that might already have a base of volunteers with the skills you're looking for. Posting in job boards where you basically have a headline about what you need, and going for specific communities. Felicia is a great example of a targeted recruitment that we're in the middle of right now.
So I was exiting our building, and I saw this girl looking at our door, and she was kind of like, what is this? Like, I can see her thought pattern coming up. And I just approached her. I was like, do you need any information? And then she's like, yeah, what's hot dogs? And I explained it to her, and she had said that she was interested in volunteering. So I was like, luckily enough, I'm the volunteer coordinator. And she explained that she was going to school for humanities and sciences. And that trigger of humanities, that word, triggered me to think about how we can recruit better, because we had a smaller list targeted to arts organizations specifically, or arts majors. But for a documentary film festival, I took history and poli-sci, and I know that we either watched the news or we watched a lot of documentaries. So hearing from her that she would be interested in, as a humanities student, really just tipped me off in terms of, hey, maybe we could start promoting to other school groups. So it is really about listening to people's ideas and really thinking outside of the box, or even looking into what you have done in the past. I definitely know I started out as a volunteer, and then it led to my career now. So yeah, listening to those little trigger words, and then you can figure out a strategy in terms of targeting to specific people.
And the third one is what's called concentric circle recruitment. This is kind of like what we're doing today, where you're meeting the other organizations with similar needs, relying on their networks, cross-promoting all your different volunteer needs. It's a great way to find leadership roles because you're relying on the experience that they've had at different festivals. A great example is we always, we don't have our volunteer application for the festival open year round, because generally if people apply to volunteer in June, by the time it comes to January, February, when we're doing orientation sessions, they might have forgot, they might have lost interest. But we do always make sure our application is up and running in the beginning of September. And why do you think that is? TIFF. We know that most of our volunteers volunteer at TIFF as well. And so we like the idea that during the Toronto Film Festival, they're talking about hot docs and they're talking with other volunteers. And this way, if they say, oh, you should try hot docs, that those volunteers can just go to our website and apply and not have to wait a month or two to fill out the application. So we always make sure we're ready to go to take advantage of the word of mouth that's being spread at the TIFF Festival. Obviously, staff and co-workers, other volunteers spreading the word, family and friends, board members who belong to different organizations, get them involved. One area that we heavily involved with at Hot Docs is the VACT committee. This is the Volunteer Awards for Arts and Culture in Toronto. It's basically a program where we realize that a lot of volunteers do a lot of different festivals and events throughout the year. So by kind of getting together as a group, we can recognize that level of commitment. And what we do is we track their participation in the various events through the year, like Luminato, like Inside Out, Hot Docs, TIFF. And then at the end of the year on National Volunteer Day, we have an event basically recognizing those who went above and beyond and how many different organizations within the VAC committee that they participated in. So that's a great way to sort of build a community of organizations, and we always balance off each other, our recruitment calls and that kind of stuff. Another organization we're, as the Hot Docs Ted Rogers Cinema are part of, is the Bloor Culture Corridor, which was set up a few years ago, reflecting all the different cultural institutions from ROM all the way to our venue at Bathurst. So we meet with those other organizations, and it's great too, because a lot of those institutions that we're connected with, like the Bata Shoe Museum, the ROM, the Royal Conservatory for Music, some of those organizations aren't so event-based. They're year-round volunteers, so it's tapping into a different kind of set of volunteers by having those that do it year-round to maybe take a break from the other one and participate in our event instead. And then we go to
Great.
next slide.
We also
Actually,
have,
before we go that, anybody else have any suggestions on
Yeah.
recruitment and things you've done that have worked well?
we also have 3 members of our VACT committee here. Anybody want to just share like how it works and the benefits of it? I know 3 of you are new, but Rachel definitely knows the advantages of volunteer calls, so maybe we can talk about that.
In regards to that, or?
Regards to VACT in general.
Definitely sharing recruitment calls between organizations is one of the best ways to both share amazing volunteers and inform volunteers of the awesome different opportunities. Through that, it's sort of this built-in connection, because volunteers have to volunteer with many organizations in order to get invited to the VACT Awards in December. So it's really helpful that through this network, they're understanding which events are connected with VACT so that they can appropriately choose with which organizations to volunteer for. Extending beyond that, I also find that a lot of us, if not all of us, are arts. Terry's not here right now. Sending recruitment calls beyond arts organizations is a really smart thing I've personally found, especially if you're looking at where your volunteers also volunteer, because they may be a big brother or a big sister or volunteer with newcomers, and you might not think to send your arts call to these different organizations in different communities, but really people have very diverse interests. So really expanding beyond the general scope of other festivals, events, other arts organizations, and really making it a much more broad recruitment process I've found to be very useful.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for sharing. Anybody else want to share recruitment strategies? Okay, so VACT definitely is a great resource. It's not just for sharing, as Rachel said, sharing our volunteer calls, but to be able to come as a committee and just talk about how we can redesign how we communicate to volunteers, because we have to give them information about other institutions. We do go over what that communication strategy is. So it just makes it easier for us to build on our critical path and make sure that we're communicating with people effectively.
Sorry, with back also, I like the, and again, I'm newer with it, so I'm trying to understand it all. I like the, there's an end game per se, do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
for volunteers, it's, you know, you're so close, you know, and a lot of them don't know that, you know, there is that recognition that's there. And I think that the opportunity to recognize, not only on event or, you know, while the volunteers are actually engaging in their events, but to show them that, you know what, we do see the bigger picture, we do see and recognize what you've done. I think that also promotes them coming back, continuously coming back, sharing their, you know, their award that they may actually have, to have that, you know, wherever their workplace might be, or just even to carry it around. It's a sense of accomplishment, and more so than anything else, it's not just them doing nice things, it's also a part of something bigger. And when you're part of something bigger, you know, you tend to promote it a little bit better as well. And I think it shows that, you know, volunteering is a very big picture.
Yeah.
We're part of something that's just bigger than just, you know, a one-off event.
I think what also is good is a bit of the stamp of approval. Volunteers obviously are giving their time for free. That's the whole point of volunteering. But they appreciate working for organizations and events that are organized, that are not going to waste their time, not going to bring them in for a shift and say, oh, just sit here for an hour and then we'll get to what you need. They want to be somewhere where it's organized and they're going to have fun. It's going to have a positive experience. And I think by working as a community together, we're all kind of watching out for each other. And we're not, you know, generally, you're going to promote those events that you know are run by professional volunteer managers who are doing an excellent job treating the volunteers well. And that way, your volunteers know that if you're saying, you know, try Luminato, they're saying, we're basically saying we approve of Luminato's volunteer program. So it gives them the chance to apply for something new without worrying about, is it going to be a good experience there?
The knowledge also is very progressive that way as well. It's just from event to event, you know, what they're actually getting out of it. And again, as you mentioned, then kind of blend it all in together to give them options. I think that people who often are not art-minded per se, and all of a sudden fall into an art place, you know, they never knew that they were excited about art before, which was myself. When I volunteered for Nuit Blanche at first, I had no idea that I was really into it. And now to give this opportunity for people, I think is really going to help them.
Yeah. It's a good segue into how you put on a recruitment event. So we do want to make recruiting fun, and this is one way that Alex has tried to make it a fun event. So we have something called Volunteer in Culture coming up. Volunteer in Culture is a recruitment fair. It's one of the best methods of the warm body strategy in terms of recruiting. This way you get people into one area. So for this one that's coming up on March 17th, we will be in the George Weston Gallery, where we have, or theater, sorry, George Weston Theater, where we will have approximately 200 volunteers coming in and having presenters present to them. So this is a great way for, next slide please, Alfie. Thank you. It is a great way, again, to create buzz for your event or for your organization. It's fun and exciting because it's kind of like speed dating. So you have your organizations come up and present in 5 minutes what their organization is about and why they would want you as a volunteer. And then after that, they have the opportunity, the volunteers have the opportunity to meet the actual volunteer managers. There's opportunity to offer raffle prizes, just to make it, again, a really fun event. At the end of this recruitment event that we're having on March 17th, we are showing a movie about cats, so hopefully that's an incentive for people that really love cats. Again, I have asked about 8 organizations. We'll have 9 in total. And they'll be presenting their slides throughout the event. So next slide. All right. There are a couple of benefits. I'm going to pass it on to Ron to talk about those benefits of volunteer and culture.
I think one of my favorite things about volunteer and culture meetings is there's this slight hint of competition with the pitches. There's some organizations and people presenting that just like, knock it out of the park, and then you just feel the rest of the presentations after that being a little more humble, or maybe just trying to keep up the energy going. So obviously, being part of a community, there's the shared promotion for the event. It's not just for the next week's event, for instance, we've invited all the Hot Docs volunteers to come out. They're not going to come out to hear about Hot Docs. They're going to come out to hear about the other organizations. By spreading the costs between different organizations, you're obviously reducing individual costs there. By making it a well-organized event, you definitely create a good, solid first impression for your event, that it's well-organized and takes care of the volunteers. Again, sharing social media, create the buzz that way. Get a bigger crowd than you would normally if you're just holding your own kind of individual recruitment event. Creating more interest, also getting that higher retention, because you're getting volunteers who are going from organization to organization. Next slide. So planning the event.
All right, so of course you want everything to go as planned. It is a major event, and it is something that is going on top of what you're already doing for recruitment strategies. So for instance, I'm also getting ready for festival while also planning this event. So it could take a lot of time and resources, but as Ron said, the benefits are very valuable. So as I said, it takes some time, but that time can be broken down. So the first month is to research venue, research who you want to market the event to. And then the second month, you are developing your promotional material, and you're also thinking about social media strategies and getting the buzz out there, and following up with any of the other partners. I think the biggest factor of this is that there are many moving parts. So there are many different organizations that you would have to work with if you are putting on a recruitment fair of this size. To make it real, I will have to email about 10 other people to make sure that they are on track. So just keep that in mind in terms of planning, while also thinking about other things in terms of timing the event and making sure that we have volunteers for the event. So by the third month, we continue the social media strategy and outreach, and then making sure that the presenters are ready for the actual event. You have to have your event list, and like I said, have volunteers ready, and make sure that the venue is ready for the event. After that 3-month process, it is hopefully you can take a break and maybe sleep a little bit. It might be a little bit hard for the work that we do, but a break is really necessary afterwards, and the celebration.
All right, so continue with the volunteer life cycle. We're now at the bottom, just on the left there, orientation and training. So you've got people interested in your event or your organization. Now you want to get them orientated and participating. So orientation sessions. So going through the basics here, this is the key point of this is your sales pitch. This is your chance to explain exactly what the volunteers are going to be doing, get them involved, get them hyped up, sell your event, sell your organization. You want to plan your date early, promote it. People obviously have busy lives. They want to be able to plan ahead to attend. Choose a good venue. Collect your RSVPs so you get a sense of numbers. Make sure you don't over-invite or under-invite. Get your past volunteers involved in the organization if you can, with the setup, with the sign-ins, greeting people as they arrive. Make it a fun presentation. It's always good if you can somehow incorporate other activities around it, not just coming down for orientation, but coming down for, say, a film afterwards or some other activities, snacks, lunch, that kind of thing. So you want to be prepared. Anyway, so you want to, exactly there, so decide whether a volunteer continues with the organization. So 50% rule, half the people that are applied to volunteer are going to actually show up at the orientation. If you do your orientation right, though, they're all going to volunteer for the organization and the event. Outline your mission and vision, have a clear agenda. It's great. I think it's great to have a handout. It's always fun to have a bit of, I think you want your event to be comfortable right from the get-go. So when they arrive, if you have like a comfortable environment, some music playing maybe, reading materials is always great because obviously they don't know each other. They're just arriving. They're new to the organization. They're new to everything. So give them something to read while they're waiting for the event to start. Have a clear agenda and get your current volunteers involved. So next slide. So to include in your presentation, to keep it straightforward, have a welcome, an overview of the session. It's great, obviously, if you can introduce the festival team or the events team. They'll definitely want to get your whole volunteer team involved so they know the faces and people that they will be interacting with. That'll be their resources, their guides through your whole event. If you can get other staff involved from different departments, key personnel that they might be interacting with, that's always a great thing to have as well. You want a very organized, smooth presentation. Again, I think I've touched on this before, but it builds confidence in the volunteers that your event is going to be organized. If it's too haphazard, they might think twice. You want to do your sales pitch. So talk about the volunteer expectations and roles, what the kind of stuff they'll be doing. Benefits is a huge part of your presentation. You've already got them interested in your event or your organization. That's why they're there. I think benefits you want to convey in such a way that how much it's going to control how much they'll want to volunteer. I think if you got them in the room, if you sold them on your event, they're going to want to volunteer. How much they're going to volunteer is going to probably be affected by the benefits. You want to obviously manage expectations. Like I said, we do 5 orientation sessions for Hot Docs with new volunteers. And before each session, we always we check to see where we're at in terms of signups. So by the time we get to the 5th event, we're really telling people, we're honest with them. This is the 5th. They know we had 5 orientations. This is the 5th one. There might not be some jobs still available. We'll talk about a lot of the jobs anyway, but might say they're filled, and this is the kind of stuff that if they get involved this year, they might just be ripping tickets, but next year they'll be returning volunteers. They'll have the chance to take on these extra tasks. So you want to give them that opportunity so they still want to get involved this year, knowing that there's maybe limited roles available, but they get involved, enjoy their experience, they'll come back and do other things. You want to get into some details about the shifts, about the tasks, about the timings, all that kind of stuff, but you want to make sure that you're not talking about how to do the job. This is not a training session. This is more about why they want to do the job, what's going to fit their schedule, what's going to fit their interests, all that kind of stuff. Obviously, so policy and dress code, that can affect their decisions to get involved as well, just to make sure they're on the same page. Definitely, as part of the post-festival experience, check with your volunteers, get some feedback on what they thought of the orientation session, what worked, what didn't work, make those changes year to year to create the best program possible. And the huge chunk is the next steps. You want to make sure that they know what's next. In the past, we'd do the orientation, we'd have the signups right away. They'd mark themselves down on sign-up sheets. So we obviously, we wanted to make sure they knew that, okay, once this session's over, we're going over the next room, this is what's going to be there, this is how to find the shifts you want, have it laid out in nice, neat order. Now, the more modern method is we go through a very detailed explanation of our sign-up system online. So we take them through all the steps, basically how to sign into the portal, what the email they're going to get, the login procedure, where to find what we call the volunteer profile tab. This is, again, where I was talking earlier, where they go in and give out more details about their experiences, their skills, their interests, various other things, if they're interested in pre-festival shifts. And then we go through the whole process of claiming shifts, where to find the shifts, how to find the shifts, how to sort. We use a lot of filtered lists, basically, so they can go through a whole menu and choose by venue, choose by task. They can also, there's a side way where they can look just based on date, because some people will volunteer they'll choose their shifts based on when they're available, or they might choose it on what the jobs they want to do. So it's always good to have it like an organized system for the sign up, but also to explain all those bits in your orientation so that when they leave the room, they know exactly what's going to happen. They know, for Hot Docs, for instance, they know within 2 days they're going to get an email that says, this is your login, this is the link, go to this. They're going to know exactly what it's going to look like when they open it up and how to find the shifts they want. And also, again, like I said before, encouraging them to come back and look for other shifts that may change, basically take responsibility for their own schedule. And then also we talk about, in our case, because they're signing up online, we also have what we call registration, which is when just before the festival, we have our volunteer office. They come down, they get their badge, they get their t-shirts. So we make sure they know the dates of when they need to come down and get all that stuff. We make sure they know that they have to do it before their first shift, but they don't have to do it on the first day. They can do it anytime. These are the hours of operations. We talk a lot about just where to find, because it's often a lot of information at orientation, and they're new, it could be confusing, and they might have other accessibility requirements. So to have that information online in easy to read forms, and just making sure that they know where they can find the information when they need it, so they don't need to, again, cuts back on the whole communication. The last thing you want, you did your orientation right, is if you get no emails for the next 48 hours. If you did something not too clear, then you're going to get a lot of emails saying, I can't do this, I can't do that, I don't know what this is, and that's the kind of stuff that you want to avoid, and just solve it kind of in advance with your orientation session. Next slide.
All right. So Ron listed many of the things that you would want to do after orientation. Is basically, some people would say that you're doing a lot of hand-holding, but it is for people who might have accessibility needs, or we have to keep in mind that these people are new to the organization and don't necessarily know everything about the details that we need to know in order to get our jobs done, and in order for them to get the information for their volunteer shifts. The major thing with anything for staff and volunteers, it's very much saying thank you. Thank you is so key. We really want to appreciate that people have taken their time out to actually listen to us for an hour, talk about, telling them what to do. So we do want to thank them for coming out. We also want them to sign a volunteer agreement. This is just to keep in mind that we might lose the audience after they leave the orientation session. So by making them commit to something, it makes them more active and more likely to be a part of the organization afterwards. On your handout, we do have an example of our terms and conditions that we ask all of our volunteers to click before they get onto our portal. So the terms and conditions, like I said, they click it. Once they read through it, they click it, and then they have access to all of their shifts. We want to let them know, again, how to sign up for shifts and any additional training involved. We actually email out the AODA training, and we get a notification for when they have completed that training. We'll also let them know about other training dates. For us, training dates are coming up at the end of March and April, so we had a strategy of letting them know that we will be in touch with them soon, because we didn't have those dates ready, because we have to rely on other departments to get those dates ready. So let them know that we will be in touch with them soon for training, and then the next step is to let them know the training dates and for them to sign up, and then to give them information about that training session. So Ron will go into more detail about training.
Any questions about orientation? Any feedback? Any comments? Anything that's worked at your own orientation sessions? No? All right, so once so they've gone to your orientation session, they've signed up for their shifts one way or another, and now they know what they're going to be doing. The time is to, next step in the process of the life cycle is to train them on their jobs. The key goal in your training sessions is to make sure that they are going to be fully comfortable at the start of their shift. They know what the tasks are, there's no surprises, they have a good sense of who their supervisors are. I think it's great to make sure that it's important to have the supervisors themselves, the department that needs the volunteers to oversee the training, but at the same time, it's good to be consistent in the training sessions. You don't want different departments managing things in different ways so that the volunteers don't all feel as comfortable as all comfortable in all the different roles. And again, it makes a good first impression to have a well-organized session and to train, be prepared. So you're going to talk about the resources that they need for the training session and the tools they're going to use while they're working on their shifts. So as we talk about the legal training, Accessibility and Ontario's Disability Act, are you going to talk about the training styles? We're going to
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go
So
over
we'll
those.
talk a bit about training styles with Felicia. Then I'll come back and talk a bit more about a training session.
So again, what we want to keep in mind is that people have different learning styles, so we want to give them different opportunities to learn. The other thing is that for large festivals and even smaller organizations, not everybody can attend the training session that you want them to attend. So you can either offer other training sessions, other dates and times, or you can offer other training styles. So there are multiple training styles that you can give to people. So there's e-learning. This is very good in terms of accessibility. So on our end, we have to make sure that our any training manual it has to be equipped for a reader, for an online reader. We have somebody who's visually impaired, and he has to have everything read to him with a reader on his computer. It's also accessible for people with mobility issues, or they just financially cannot get to the training. So giving e-learning really helps with those people. Simulation. So at our training, we actually, at our theaters training, we'll have different stations set up. I know that the City of Toronto does that sometimes. And we get our volunteers to actually go to each station and learn about what they're actually doing. So that's very helpful for people too. Group training, you can get it done all in one session. It's also a good way for people who learn differently to come out and learn from people in a group situation. On-site training, just like simulated training, this is great because you can be on site. You can see the buildings. For us, where we are at multiple buildings and facilities that have accessibility ramps, so it's good for our volunteers to know that, for the volunteers to know where washrooms are and where they will be stationed for the event. Peer monitoring, we'll talk a little bit about this a little bit more during feedback. This is essentially on-site training. So if people don't get enough information during the training session that you have picked out for them, we can do on-site training, which is just basically giving feedback from the people who are in charge. All right, next up.
So what to include in your training session? Obviously a welcome and an overview. Introduce all the staff that are involved with the training. Again, it should be the staff that are supervising the team on the job, which is ideal. If you could do your training on site, that's especially useful. I think TIFF, I know, is great for holding all their volunteer sessions. They've got the capacity to do it. They hold each volunteer session at the venue itself. It's a great way to show the venue and get the volunteers who may not know it that well. They include some of the key TIFF theater operations staff in their orientations, the training sessions at those venues. They also include, I know when they were at the Hot Doc Cinema, they would include me in the training so that I could introduce the building, and they would know that I represent the building, whereas someone else represents the TIFF staff. You want to go through what the tasks and responsibilities are. This is the what they'll be doing. I think it's also important to convey why they are doing it, why you're using volunteers, what the purpose of those tasks are. Obviously talk about how to do the tasks, the things they need. If you're talking about a specific thing, like for instance, we have scanner training at Hot Docs where the volunteers, we don't rip tickets anymore, we use a scanner to scan barcodes on all the tickets. So obviously when we do the, maybe not obviously, but when we do the scanner training, we do it with the scanning devices themselves, pass them around, everyone uses them, everyone goes through the steps so that they're comfortable with the equipment that they're going to be using on shift. Again, we talk about the venue, knowing all the answers that the questions that might come up. If you've done this before, we all know the kind of questions, like washrooms was a good example. So making sure that they have the information they need to answer the questions that they'll be answering repeatedly. And it's always a good time to remind them that even though it might be the 40th time you're answering the question, it's the first time that person is asking it, so don't treat them that way. It's a good time to remind them about some accessibility issues as well, just if someone has trouble reading, maybe that's why they need your assistance in checking what their ticket says, and not because they're being lazy or just can't do it. It's good to talk about emergency procedures. It depends on the extent of involvement, but the volunteers should know if there is anything that they should know about their own safety in an emergency. They should know about if they have responsibilities in the event of an emergency and just how things work at that particular venue. Obviously very important to go through the resources. The training, again, it's a lot of information, so it's good for them to know that they can find this information after the meeting, whether it's a handout that they keep with them or it's an online, like we post all our training manuals in a digital form on our portal so they know they can go back in, sign into the portal. They know where the shifts are, they know they click on that tab, they can find the whole manual that was discussed at the meeting. So if they're particularly keen, they can look it up again afterwards. It's good to remind them as well just the people resources, who they're working with in a group setting. If they are, we always tell the volunteers if they're brand new to the job, like for instance the theater operations, theater team, if they're brand new to the job, they're brand new to the venue, when they sign in with the captain, just mention that. Just say you're new, and then the captain can make the decision about what tasks they give that volunteer and what pairing them up, as we said, peer mentoring. In this very simple way, pairing them up with a volunteer that's done it before. So if the captains know the team, they know who's done what, they can make the new volunteers comfortable in those roles. It's always good to go through at this time some basic reminders about what the dress code is on shift. We love to talk about venue details like where to go when you arrive, where can you put your stuff, what stuff not to bring. Don't bring your laptop computers, because maybe the venue has lockers that they can use, maybe it doesn't, just so that they're prepared, they know what to bring, what not to bring, where to put their stuff during their shift. And also talk about the benefits as well, just remind them the stuff they're getting for their shift, how that works. I find it's always very important that even though the department that's employing the volunteers should run the training because they know the jobs, they know what needs to be done, they know how it needs to be done, it's always good to have a volunteer office representative at these sessions, just to make sure that the volunteers are comfortable with the training and got all the information they needed, but also just to answer basic questions. There's always somebody at a training session who forgot what the vouchers are, how they get their vouchers, what they can use them for. And so those kind of simple questions, it's always better to have a volunteer office representative who can answer those questions rather than the supervisor going, I don't know anything about that. And of course, obviously, just making sure when they leave, they know what the next steps are. Is this the end? Is this the next thing they go from that training session to their first shift? Is there something in between? Like for instance, we have a registration process, checking at the volunteer office, just making sure that they know exactly what they're going to do next time, what the next steps are. So next slide. Over to Stephanie.
Yeah. Great. So unless you're starting absolutely from scratch, you're likely building off of an existing volunteer management strategy or making adjustments or adaptations to one that that's been maybe in the works for quite some time. And actually, Ron and Felicia brought up some really good examples of where diversity and inclusion might fit in with those. And I've made some notes here, but I'm wondering if anybody would like to mention one that might have stuck out to them, something that maybe they're using right now and maybe upon reflection didn't realize that it had a diversity and inclusion component to it, or something that they thought they might want to start applying to their current strategy. Is there anything that stuck out to folks? Yeah.
Excuse me. Our volunteer recruitment is a little bit different. We don't host huge sessions because our volunteer recruitment is ongoing for the year. We have a million different things happening. We try to be as accommodating to the volunteers as possible. So we'll have set dates at our site for people to come, but our volunteer coordinator does a lot of off-sites as well. So if they work like a crazy bank job and they have to work like 12 hours a day, she'll meet them downtown at lunch in their office, or on the rare occasion there's a weekend session. But we try to accommodate as much as we can to fit people's schedules and accessibilities.
Great. So accommodation could already be factored into your strategy, and you might be thinking about where else it might apply depending on specific communities that you want to work with. Yeah. Anyone else? I mean, what I heard when Ron was talking especially is that there's a lot of emphasis placed on creating a comfortable environment. There's also emphasis on making sure that language is clear, that we're really reinforcing tasks and expectations, and to Felicia's point as well, learning styles. So we come in and we're expecting people to do certain tasks, but they have different perspectives of what that might mean. So being very clear on how they can get the most out of their involvement. So really there are kind of two things at odds here happening right now. There's orientation and training, where we're talking more about the need to know, maybe some of the legalities as well, so what kind of training you need, some of the policies that you need to know in order to be a volunteer in the organization, and how you might interact with not only the volunteers but the public. But there's something else happening here that can contribute to sort of long-term volunteer management strategies and also just employment strategies in general. And I'm wondering if anybody might have caught it. Anybody have experience with onboarding or have heard that term? It might not be something that people working in the arts hear very often, but onboarding is somewhat separate from orientation and training. So, whereas orientation and training can have those very strict sort of checklist items that you have to either adhere to or sign off on to be involved, onboarding is a more comprehensive process that takes into account the full engagement of the volunteers. So from the planning stages to recruitment to when they're actually on site to their post experience and how that might contribute to their own feedback and evaluation of the program and even retention. So it could be, to Felicia and Ron's point, pointing out how else you get the volunteer involved in the organization. What other staff are involved. And that can lead to things like further volunteer empowerment and how they contribute to the organization moving forward. There's one example that Ron brought up that I'm finding that more and more organizations are using, and I was wondering if anybody caught it around the mentorship piece. Are there other organizations that have this kind of element to their strategy? Yeah? Did you want to speak to it a little bit?
So we run a program called Walk and Talk, where we recruit volunteers and we match them with our clients. And they go, everything is on Google Docs, so once we do the matching, we move back. And they're expected to meet, the mentee and the mentor meet once a week. And then every 2 weeks, they just put a little online thing. There's a program where they'll just say, I met here them for coffee, I took them to the mall, or I showed them the TTC, so because we work with a lot of, most of our clients are newcomers. So we do run that program. And also, currently we're not running that program, but we did run this program called the Ambassadors, where we recruit volunteers who actually were our clients. And we gave them training and about community services. And these ambassadors now became not necessarily were mentoring one-on-one, but even a group of people. Or they would go in their apartment buildings and say, okay, there's an event happening here. Or did you want to register your kids for the March break activities, things like that. So these ambassadors were trained in community services and they would go further.
Certainly, and when you transpose that to the idea of maybe creating a volunteer strategy within the arts, I mean, being able to bring somebody in and foster that sense of ownership of tasks, of ownership of mission and mandate and what they're supporting, makes a huge difference in terms of how that strategy continues.
I'm curious, for the walk and talks, do you use like a shadow element where like someone who's new, the volunteer is new to the task, would they go with an experienced volunteer on a walk and talk to learn the job?
No, it's, we say it like the program is called walk and talk, but it's not really a walk.
It could happen.
They can meet up anywhere. They can even they decide to meet at our center. We give them the options. We tell them what are the opportunities that are available, and then again, it's purely based on the needs of the clients, what they want to know about.
So in terms of preparing like a volunteer doing it for the first time, what training do you give them?
So basically, we don't give any specific training, but we inform them that these are some of the common things that happen. They would want to, because we know our clients, so they would want to know about the TTC, the transit system. They would want to find out where, if they are from the same cultural background, where are the stores for these kind of particular things that they want. Or if they, so depending on what the needs of the clients are, we give them a very general overview. And for the most part, our mentors are not newcomers. So it's not a very difficult task.
Right.
And we're always there, so if supposing they feel like, oh, I don't have an answer for this, so the client may say, I want to do my taxes. I didn't make any money last year, but I was told I have to do it. Now I don't have money to even do the taxes because I didn't make money. So then they can connect with us and we'll find free tax clinics for the client and forward the information.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very open-ended, very general kind of a program.
Yeah, so an organic kind of process. And in thinking about those kind of points and how they can evolve, I mean, it sets us up to start thinking about metrics that we might use to gauge things like volunteer feedback and evaluation, which we're going to be talking about next. Nice little segue.
All right, so a lot of our training comes as a result of feedback. I'm thankful for both of your coming from smaller organization, even knowing how you have done it helps us larger organizations just think outside of the box. Alex, before she left on mat leave, we wanted to try and get a mentoring program up and running, but we've had to put it till next year. And even thinking about going above and beyond to other organizations or where people work. For larger organizations, we can also think about that. It might take a little bit more time and resources, but to get to the people, we might have to do it. But yes, a lot of the training comes from feedback, and it comes from feedback from our volunteers as well as our peers. The next slide, please. Thanks. I'm sure many of you have been in the position where a volunteer comes up to you and tells you a lot about either their life or about the shift. We definitely have to go through that process, and it's very enlightening. I'll tell you a story. At one of our meet and screens where our returning volunteers come and know a little bit more about what's new for the festival. I was approached by one of the volunteers after the meet and screen, and she had said that what's important for her is that she feels safe during her shift. So what that means was, for me, for all of us, we have to think about, are we telling people the right information about the hierarchy system in terms of an escalation process? Do they know who they can turn to if they feel threatened by somebody? Especially in this climate now, and we are in the arts and entertainment field. So we want to make sure that our volunteers as well as our staff are protected well. And it was just a general oversight, but hearing from other people in terms of what is important to them is important for us to be able to train them effectively. We also have Taylor here and also Aiden and myself who do interviews with our past volunteers, just so that we can get feedback on what they experienced for the festival in previous years. The volunteers can tell us, but feedback is also a two-way street, and part of our job is to ensure that we are giving feedback effectively. So whether that's encouraging people, I think encouragement is as good as asking somebody to improve something. So remembering that we are all human, and sometimes we need to be spoken to in terms of whether we need to improve a certain element, or if we want to be encouraged, we have to give some positive feedback as well. On your handout, I've given a sample of our captain's reports. So for us, with 800 volunteers, we have captains. The City of Toronto has captains too. I'm not sure if Luminato has captains. So it makes it easier for us because we have a small team of coordinators and managers. The captain's report enables our captains to give us feedback about what is happening on site, and we can get to them, if not the same night, then the next morning. Feedback can be given from, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
For your captains, what kind of training do you provide them with?
We do have additional mandatory training. Some of the training is optional, but this is definitely mandatory. And we go through conflict resolution. They have amalgamated training, so they will go to the same training where the theater reps who are paid go to, so that they have an understanding of what's going on at the theater. Anything else you want to throw in?
Part of the training, we also make sure that they know what their responsibilities are and how to follow through on it. So things like, obviously if you're charged with checking in the volunteers, when you show up on your shift, you need to know where's the list of volunteers, how do I check them in, how do I deal with latecomers, policies, as well as, in the event of shorter volunteers, having the resources to, call this number, get some extra volunteers brought over. And then also just the captain's report itself. It's important that they know that the expectations that they're filling out this paperwork, this is the kind of stuff we're looking for, this is where to find the paperwork, this is what to do when you're done at the end of your shift with the paperwork.
And is the training delivered like in training sessions? Is it online?
No, it's,
Usually in-person
yeah.
training sessions.
Yeah. Usually in person. And the captains also, they have to volunteer for the festival at least once before. And they also have to send in a resume and do an interview. And then this year we've asked any of the older volunteers to give us feedback so that we know what's going on. Yeah, thanks for that question. It's essentially, so the reporting is, so that we can be as direct as possible in terms of if we need to correct a situation, it has to be in a timely manner and directed at the right people. We want to have as much feedback as possible, so they can connect with us via email or phone. We also have, you can also plan group feedback sessions. It might be beneficial for organizations here to have volunteer committees. That's another thing that we're trying to in place for the coming years. It's just so that, again, it's the accessibility thing and the diversity thing. There are things that we might not think about, and getting our volunteers to speak up when they can is a great initiative. You also have surveys. Surveys can be sent out right after the festival or right after your event or anytime you'd like to, just so that you can get that immediate feedback. All right, next up. Retention and rewards. I think I'm up as well. I'm gonna stick here with you guys. All right, again, in terms of feedback, retention and rewards are important. For feedback, you're building the trust of people, and with that trust, you would hopefully get people to stay with your organization. In terms of retention is basically, if you could switch slides for me, please. Thank you. We just want, again, people to feel trusted and respected. We're all human. We want to express ourselves. And we do this at our organization by giving leadership positions. So it could be the captains, it could be our marketing team, that we allow our marketing team to go out and do what they need to do, and we trust that they give out the information and act accordingly on our behalf to other organizations and businesses. So definitely giving them that leadership position, really giving them the opportunity to develop their skills, and constant engagement is another thing. For this year, it's our 25th anniversary. What we did was we asked a couple of our volunteers who have been dedicated to our organization to come in, and we'll be featuring them as one of our star volunteers. So constant engagement, recognition, and giving them people leadership opportunities definitely gets people more involved and wanting to come back. All right, next up for rewards.
Yep. So obviously a big part of retention is if they have a great experience and love the benefits of volunteering, then they're going to come back year and year and participate again, or of course spread the word, encourage others to join the program as well. Here in the arts, and especially events and that kind of stuff, obviously a lot of your volunteers are choosing to volunteer with your organization and your event because they like what you're doing. They like your programming, they like the content. So providing access to that content is an important part, I think, of rewarding the volunteers. With event tickets, we use vouchers for screenings at Hot Docs. Sneak peeks if you can, it's connecting the programming with the meetings, that kind of stuff, volunteer appreciation events. If you can, collaborate with like-minded organizations. Often your programming, similar to other programming, they have overall interest in that kind of stuff. Events, if you can somehow do a ticket swap with another organization, that's a great way to do it. I think it's important to look at these very tangible benefits that are very exact, it's important to make sure that you've got a fair distribution plan set up. For instance, you know, when we have roles of greater responsibility, like the theater captains, some of the marketing roles that we have for the volunteers that involve them being more autonomous. Basically, here's a bunch of program guides, go out to the corner and distribute them. There's no one supervising them as directly. So when we have those kind of more autonomous roles or more responsibility, we offer double vouchers, because that's obviously an easy way to recognize that the job is more important, takes a bit more skill, a bit more reward. And we also we have a system based on the number of vouchers is based on the number of hours. We make it very clear up ahead of time, before they even sign up for the shifts, that, you know, if the shift is less than 5 hours, you'll get 1 voucher, but if the shift is 6 hours, you'll get 2 vouchers. This again affects their decision of what shifts they'll take, hopefully not too much, but it also shows that, you know, distribution is fair. You don't want the feedback that, you know, the volunteers are talking, they're like, that person did this and they got this much in return, and I did this and I only got this much. So make sure that the incentives are distributed fairly. Obviously, sometimes you do need to, you know, extra incentivize the shifts, but just, you know, get the feedback and keep it nice and even. Notes every year to what needs to be done. A lot of volunteers are looking for experience and opportunities to grow career-wise or make connections. So if you can set up any kind of networking opportunities, meet professionals, if you can get them involved with industry events, we allow our volunteers access to the industry sessions where they can listen to documentary filmmakers talk about what they're doing. They get to basically be in the same room as the thousands of delegates, not at the same time, but with a bunch of the delegates from the festival, so they can work their career up there. I think one of my favorite volunteers many years ago came in from Montreal and just out of the blue, and we volunteered. He was driving to the airport even. He's now a regular attendee, and he actually produced an Academy Award nominated documentary short. So this is someone who loved documentaries, wanted to get involved, and Hot Docs was his kind of starting point many years ago. Obviously, socializing is social reasons, the many reasons why people volunteer. They want to meet people, they want to meet like-minded people with similar interests. They're all at the same event, something to talk about. So staff and volunteer appreciation parties are a great way to give them the chance to socialize. I think particularly after your event, if you have the budget to hold a party, if you can get sponsorship involved, that's a great way too. I think an important part of that too is also including the staff. We always have the staff and volunteers at the same event with Hot Docs, and this can be the theater staff, the head office staff. It's just everybody's together. It's on an even kind of basis for socializing. It's also a great way to thank the volunteers. We very much love, we've always had from the very top, our president loves to walk into a theater and just greet volunteers and thank them for volunteering. So if you can get your staff, part of the staff training in a way is to get them to show appreciation for the volunteer, understand what the volunteers do for the organization, and just, you know, thank them on a straight one-to-one basis. Some of the volunteers will need participation letters or letters of reference. This is always a great way to keep them happy with their experience by providing those things. If you can, thank you notes is an amazing way to really show appreciation. I think we do it in some of the bigger roles, the more like things like captains. If you send out a personal thank you note for taking a leadership role, that can be quite encouraging. And again, saying it in person directly, encouraging all your staff and even the board of directors to appreciate the volunteers. Mentioning in speeches, we've probably all seen it at events where we're introducing the film and they thank the volunteers, the crowd goes wild. TIFF does an amazing job every year of creating a whole video intro as part of the package, where they actually, you know, do like a whole video volunteer thank you, which always brings the crowd loves that, because everybody, the audience knows what the volunteers are bringing to your organization, so they're more than happy to applaud them in that way. Anything else you guys can think of in terms of benefits that you offer, that you can offer, or any challenges that you might find? I know for us, we're fortunate because we have the year-round cinema, so the vouchers we give out are good year-round at the cinema. I think for event work especially, the challenge can often be how do how do you give out the rewards in such a way that they'll stay with your event right to the very end? We started out the honor system at Hot Docs many years ago when we didn't have the cinema, and therefore the vouchers that they receive from for the benefits they receive from volunteering, the vouchers, they want to use it during the festival. So we actually used the honor system, and we gave them the vouchers ahead of time. So if they committed to 30 hours of volunteering, we'd give them 6 vouchers before the festival so they can actually see films right up to the end. And that helped to ensure that we had enough volunteers at the end of the festival. Now, of course, it's gotten bigger, a little bit harder to manage, so we do now basically give out the vouchers at the end of a shift, and then they still have time to use it during the festival. But of course, if they don't use it during the festival, they can come back to the cinema and use it then. So that's our advantage. Anybody else have any challenges with benefits?
Almost all of our events are free. So one of our challenges is what do we give our volunteers? We don't really have paid tickets. They can just come to our events because they're usually free. So we've been talking to other organizations and businesses to get some tickets. AGO has been giving us some tickets to be able to have some kind of appreciation, a tangible appreciation to our volunteers.
Yeah.
That's a challenge for us.
And a lot of local business partners too might be, appreciate the volunteers, and they, if you have the opportunity to kind of go around and get like, a pizza lunch sponsored by or discounted by a pizza restaurant, so that they know that putting the name out with the volunteers is good for their business too. So if you could sell it that way, that's a good way to do it. Anybody else? Benefits? One other comment I want to make on retention is just making the process of coming back to your festival as easy as possible. The more you kind of acknowledge that volunteers that have done it before do not need to go through the whole orientation process, do not get advantages that new volunteers don't have. So for instance, for us, we're actually doing pretty good this year. I think we're about 50% retention. So half our volunteers from last year are coming back this year. We do what we call meet and screens. We basically have a meeting. We invite them to the cinema. We talk for an hour about basically covering what's new, so they know what's new. They're not confused by anything. Like a good example is we went one year from a 3-shift minimum because the size of the festival expanded so much. We went to a 4-shift minimum. So it was very important that all our returning volunteers knew that we went from 3 to 4 and make the decision to stick with us if they can do the 4 shifts. But we give them a popcorn and a drink, and they stay to watch one of the screens at the cinema. Again, we're taking advantage of the resources that we have. But this way, and then they just feel appreciated. They know that they can come back on without going through jump through the hoops. They also get priority access. They get first chance to sign up for the shifts, which I think makes a big difference. We've always done that, where we had meetings first with the volunteers coming back. They get first dibs on the shifts, and then we start having our new volunteer orientation. Comment or question?
Do you give your returning volunteers priority in choosing their shifts?
Yes. Yeah. The way we do it is we give about a week, 1 week of the shifts being online available to them to sign up, and then pre-sale before the volunteers themselves, the new volunteers, start accessing them. By giving a 1 week window as well, gives them a chance to not just jump in there and grab stuff, but also think about it for a few days, and if they need to, something's changed, cancel it. Any other thoughts on what brings your volunteers back year in year? Or stick around for the whole year?
We also do Humans of BCSL kind of initiative where we have our volunteers kind of interviewed on the different questions, like what's your favorite, place to eat around the campus, or what are your hobbies? Interesting facts about the volunteer, and then we have a little post with their picture and stuff on our social media, and we'll go to Humans of GBC. We'll also print that post and we post around the school for other volunteers to see. So that's something that they would like to see.
All right, I think it's back to Stephanie. A few more comments. Next slide.
Great. Okay. Okay, so just in essence of time, since we are getting close to 12 p.m., we want to make sure everybody has their lunch and has a chance to chat with each other. I'm just going to touch on the following slides fairly briefly. And if we have time, I can open it up to the room to provide some resources. But just know that I have some additional resources around accessibility that I can circulate to folks afterwards. And really, because we may be all at different stages, any discussion points might not be completely relevant to you at this point. So this is a piece really that, even though is woven into everything that we do through the volunteer management life cycle, is one of the elements that isn't as easily addressed. And that's for a variety of reasons. I think probably for most people, trying to become fully accessible is very costly. I mean, that's the reality. And generally, as arts organizations, especially if we have a dedicated venue or are restricted to using specific venues for whatever reason, maybe they're free, maybe they're donated, that type of thing, physical access is probably one of the key challenges or barriers that we're faced with. And there are some resources out there that are helping to sort of mitigate those challenges. But these are broader issues that our sector is facing, and really just municipalities in general are facing. So if you have that sense that that is one of the largest barriers to your organization and to your strategy at the moment, you're not alone. But some of the other considerations that sometimes we miss when we're thinking about accessibility were brought up during Felicia and Ron's presentation, and some folks have also mentioned them as well. So beyond physical access, there are also technical considerations. So in terms of things like training, if you do need to reach a wider audience who can't make it on site, what type of technical equipment or software can you use to get that information out, even to what kind of tools or equipment your staff might have to be equipped with or be trained on within your organization in order to best interact with other volunteers or with the public or specific communities that you're working with. There's also support services and individualized assistance. So Felicia talked a bit about that in terms of the volunteer that they have with the vision impairment and what considerations need to be taken there. And there's also looking at one of the things that we should be revisiting quite frequently are the practices and policies around accessibility, because there are some nice things that we can do to be more accessible and accommodating, but there are also some legislated things that we have to do to abide by the upcoming AODA compliance requirements, which come into effect between 2020 and 2025. So a lot of my suggestions around accessibility fall under just education. There are a lot of resources out there that you can start going through, and it shouldn't be something that would prevent you from, if you do have barriers, there are elements to help you kind of navigate where you are right now and start thinking more towards the future. And rather than throw it out to the group to look for suggestions of resources, I actually wanted to turn to Felicia because Hot Docs actually has an initiative on right now that I think would be really relevant for you folks to consider in terms of because a couple of components of accessibility.
Yeah. So again, it definitely relies on having a champion. So Crystal, who is our theaters manager, she and another coworker went to an accessibility conference and then jump-started the conversation with all of the directors in our organization and other people on our staff. So once that conversation started, we really, that conversation was based on what is our definition of access, what do we want people to know, who should be at the table, all of that started with that conversation. And since Crystal has developed an entire spreadsheet, and throughout the planning process for our festival, we are looking at each venue to see where those access points are. In terms of us, the delivery of our training, we have to keep in mind any accessibility needs for anybody. We also have my co-lead. They are working with Crystal to get volunteers involved in the process. So we've had a meeting with our volunteers. We've asked some people to come in and talk about their experiences. Again, it's about what are we not focusing on, and how can we can better accommodate people. It does take a lot of research, but there are things like, even in terms of P parking, we can let people know how far the P parking is, because sometimes it says it's 1 kilometer, but it might be like 1.5. So letting people know the realities of that. All of that information is online, but again, it's about thinking outside of the box and having somebody champion that initiative. The other realities of it is that we might not be able to do things this year. So it's having that realistic conversation, just saying that, okay, this year we're going to do what we can, and then put it on the critical path to do it for the following years, or have a 5 to 10 year plan. Again, abiding by the legislation.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you bring up an excellent point about the fact that, I mean, if you do have a volunteer base who've been working in multiple venues or been working with you for a number of years, you actually have a really good source of information about how accessible your programs actually are, from physical access to, you know, what it costs even to get to the venue. Is there a cost involved? You know, putting value to time and you know, what people actually have to put into being a part of the event. All of that is actually essentially at your fingertips with your volunteer base. So I'll send a little bit more information on where else you could look for some cues or some tips around how best to incorporate accessibility in an arts organization sense. But from now, we're actually going to start closing out our thoughts on diversity and inclusion. Alfie, take it away. So just coming back again to the idea of where do we start. So through the presentation, we've highlighted some areas where if you're not already working in these areas, you could definitely visit them or use them as a starting point. So if you're not involved in writing the policies at your organization, find out who is. Find out if you do have a statement of commitment to diversity and inclusion and what that actually means. Find out if your other colleagues know if it exists. And from there, you can actually even, you know, canvass your volunteers to see what their impression is. That's a really great place to start. Because really full inclusion, in the sense that everybody is being able to leverage what's available at the organization, takes more than just the written word. It's very much also the behaviors behind the people who are supporting it and the actual practices of doing it. So if you're looking for a place to start, we have a little list here of some steps that you might take, and you know, how you might actually approach it in a systematic way. And from there, you might start identifying a whole bunch of areas that you might actually start with. Keeping in mind that even though there is a lot on this list and it's not exhaustive, little steps here and there have a big impact over time. And within your own knowledge, you may think that you might not be as far ahead in some of these areas as you think, but the reality could be very different. In terms of thinking about diversity and inclusion, and even your volunteer management strategy in general, you know, we encourage you to start thinking about the positives and thinking about what's already being done well. Because if you start with kind of a solution focus kind of framework, it's more likely you're going to be able to identify things that you can move on as opposed to barriers. So I encourage you to think about what has been successful to date, what factors have contributed to these successes, and who have you been able to work with to make this happen. It could be somebody on your staff team, it could be a volunteer, it could be somebody external to your organization, like a couple of resource-based organizations that have a set of tools to share with you. So there's always a place that we can start. And then next slide. And then in terms of next steps on the diversity inclusion note, we have our resources that you can access through the Work and Culture website. And as I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, we have a set of tools that will walk you through developing a high-level action plan and then help you move on to how to actually put that into actionable steps. To move either a large idea forward or even something just really small. It's completely scalable. And of course, you can also reference Hot Docs' wonderful resources, which I'll have them recap.
Just to reiterate, we also have the volunteer resources available for everybody. So you can check out the website there. I will be emailing everybody the slides so you can review all the points that we have gone through today. And like I said, Alex has created so many documents, so many videos, which is amazing. It's at your fingertips. Just gotta click on our website. Yeah, so I'm also accessible via email. I can give you my cards, and then we can continue this discussion later. In the meantime, everybody's gonna get ready for Volunteer and Culture. So I feel like a saleswoman. Yeah, if you're available, if you know people, please let them know that we have Volunteer and Culture coming up. We have our presenters, some of our presenters that will be here. But yes, please, if you know of anybody, let them know. Okay, thank you.